Alright, so in this video, I'm going to show you how to basically make a JoJo reference in Roblox and stop time. Now my goal with this video, okay, how do I want this time stop to exactly function? Because obviously the idea of time stop varies from person to person and from game to game, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to do it so that whenever a player presses a keybind, so if the player presses like T or something, right? Then when they press T, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically make it so that the world around them loses color. Okay, so like because you know how in like JoJo and whatnot, like whenever time stop is activated, the saturation of everything goes down, like it just becomes gray and everything. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm basically going to freeze every single player who isn't the player who used the time stop. And just as a fun bonus, I'm also gonna show you how to make it so that like if a player activates time stop, they just get unfrozen, right? So maybe if there's two players with time stop and one of them freezes time, and then the other freezes time, then the other one is going to be unfrozen, right? So that's going to be pretty cool. So let's actually start right now, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is we need to detect whenever the player presses a button, okay? So I'll make a local script inside of starter player script, and the service we want to use to detect whenever a player presses like T, for example, right? So okay, let's make that our keybind. Okay, whenever the player presses T, we make it so that they can freeze time. Okay, so I'll say local UIS is equal to game get service user input service. So user input service is what you would use for input, right? And then you say UIS dot input began. Okay, so whenever the player presses any single key, like so, we can connect that to a function. It's going to give us the input and then the game processed event, okay, which I usually call proc. What this is this basically determines if the player was actually playing the game when they typed that, or if they were like doing some outside thing, like maybe typing in the chat. Like if the player was typing in the chat and they pressed T, you probably don't want time to stop if they're just typing in chat with their friends, right? So if they're typing in chat or doing something similar, then proc is true. Okay, so usually what we do is we say if proc then return end, meaning if they're not actually playing the game, if they're like typing in chat or doing something other, like that's like outside of the game, then if this is true, then we just return, and return just stops the function. Okay, so it just stops everything completely. But then if it doesn't stop it, then we can move on to the next line, and we can detect what this is. So we can say if input, and this is where we can have different options. So we can have user input type, we can have key code, we can have user input state, and yeah, that's basically it, right? User input type basically determines the type of type that's being performed. So whether it's a mouse, whether it's a keyboard, a gamepad, a touch, etc. But what key code does is it describes the specific kind of input, as in whether it's Q, W, E, R, T. So that's what we want. So if input.keycode is equal to enum.keycode.t, like so, then, so for now, let's just print out player pressed T, okay? So if I were to play the game right now, then let's say I'm gonna press T, and there we go, so it works, player press T, amazing. So now that we know that this works, okay, whenever the player now presses T, and actually another thing I'm thinking of is, it probably would be a smart idea to add like some sort of cooldown for this, right? So let me show you how to make a cooldown real quick, okay? I'll make a thing called local db, which stands for debounce, okay? And db will be equal to false, all right? And then I'll make another variable called db timer. And so what we're gonna do is it's gonna say like, okay, if input.keycode is equal to enum.keycode.t, okay? So if we press T, then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say if not db, or no, wait, no, if db, then return end. So if debounce is true, then we don't do anything. But right now it's false, so it's fine, right? And then we're gonna set debounce equal to true. Okay, we're gonna set it equal to true, and then we're gonna do whatever we want here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a test.wait, okay, for db timer. So we're gonna wait however many seconds this is, and then I'm gonna say db is equal to false. Okay, so how this is gonna work is I'm gonna start playing the game, and I'm just gonna start spamming T. Okay, I'm spamming it right now. There we go. Player press T twice. So as you can see, the cooldown actually does work. So every 6 seconds, it registers, right? So that's pretty nice, right? So we made the thing. I understand if the whole debounce concept is a bit confusing. The whole idea is that whenever you press a key, it just creates a brand new function, right? And so what this debounce allows us to do is to basically keep a consistent way of knowing whether the user's on a cooldown or not, right? Because like we're checking, okay, if the debounce is true, then we do nothing, okay? And then if it's false, then we set it to true immediately. So then any other functions will not happen, right? So the very first function which actually works sets this to true, which basically locks all the other functions from happening because they will stop if it's true, right? So this will just cancel all the other functions. We do our thing, then we wait, and then we unlock it, okay? And so then once we unlock it, then another function can do the exact same thing. And so now what I'm thinking we do is we actually make our server script, okay? And we need a way to actually communicate with our local script and the server script, right? So we need a way to actually say like, okay, when the player presses T, how do we send a message to our actual server script? I'm gonna use something called a remote event, okay? Which you probably know what these are. So let's say local event is equal to game.replicated storage, wait for child, remote events, like so. And then I'll just copy this line over to this script. And then instead of saying player, actually no, I'll keep the print. And so then what we could do is we could say, I'll just add like a couple spaces because it's a bit more readable this way. I'll say events fire server. That's it. That's all I'm gonna say. And then on the server, we'll say events on server event connect function, which will give us the player who actually fired the event. There we go. So now whenever a player presses T, okay, it's going to fire a message to the server. And then in here, we can actually stop the time, right? So what I'll do is I'll say for I, comma V in game.players get players, right? Do. So what we're doing is we're going to be looping through every single player, okay? Like it does. So in this case, I is going to be equal to the amount of times we looped. Okay, so the first time we loop, I is 1. Then the next time we loop, I is 2. Then for the next player, I is 3. For the next player, I is 4, and so on, right? And then V is equal to the actual player. Now again, you can name these whatever you want. So you can name I to whatever you want. You can name V to whatever you want. I just like using I and V just because like I'm used to it. Right, so I is stands for index and V stands for value. That's why we use I and V, okay? And so then what we could check is we could say, okay, if not V.character, so if the player does not have a character, then continue end. So what continue does is it skips this current loop, okay? So it's gonna skip and then move on to the next player, right? But if the player does have a character, then we could do another loop and we could loop through that player's character, okay? And the goal is just to loop through their character, and then when we find a part in their character, we're gonna set part.anchored to true, meaning that the player is not gonna be able to move, okay? So I'm gonna say for I, because we can't say I because I is already here, so we have to make a new name. So I'll say for I, comma VV. Like again, it's a bit confusing, right? But that's just how I do the naming. When I have a loop inside of a loop, I just I just do it double. So I just say I or VV, right? So for I VV in v.character get children then, okay? So, or wait, no, not then, do, okay? So for the character's children, what do we do, okay? Well, then we'll say if VV is a base part, so if it's a part, then VV.anchored is equal to true, okay? That's basically it. Now, the one last thing that we forgot to add, or actually, I guess two things, okay? Number one, we should actually like probably unfreeze the player who fired, right? Because like, again, if time is stopped and then our player like uses time stop, we want them to get unfrozen, right? So what we probably want to happen is like, okay, player, we'll say if player.character, then again, we'll do the whole loop for I v in player.character, get children, then, or no, again, not then, wait, do, there we go, do, if v is a base part, then v.anchored is equal to false, okay? So it's false, like so. But then, again, the one issue here is that we only have one player, right? So I could technically, like play test with 2 players, so I could do the thing where like I start a local server with 4 people. But I think what would be easier for now is, and this is counterintuitive, but like when our player starts time stop, I'm just gonna allow our own player to be frozen. Okay, so how it's gonna work is that when the player starts a time stop, it's going to unfreeze them, and then it's going to freeze all the other players. Okay, so I'll actually add this as a comment. I'll say, so I'll do 2 dashes, which makes a comment. A comment basically like allows us to, stop typing. A comment allows us to do a thing where we can just type whatever we want and the code isn't going to read that, right? So I could say unfreezes our character, okay? And then here we could say freezes other players. So now we know what these do, okay? Now the one line we should actually add here is if v is equal to player, then return end. So what this does is if it checks, okay, if the player, or not return, my bad, continue, right? What? Okay, continue. So what this will do is this will check the player who we're looping through and check if this player is equal to the player who started the time stop. Because if a player begins a time stop, we don't want to freeze them, right? So we're saying, okay, if this player that we're looping through is the same player who began the time stop, then we'll just skip over them, right? Like we're gonna skip over them because we don't want to freeze them. But just for this example, let me just show you what it's gonna look like for the player to actually be frozen, okay? So we're gonna play the game, and let's say yes, we're gonna run around, and then I'm gonna jump, and then once I jump, I'm gonna press T. Are you ready? Okay, so I'm gonna jump. Okay. Okay, small little bug fix that I just realized. We don't actually have a way of knowing when when times unfreezes. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make another event. Okay, and I'll actually begin naming these. So I'll say time start. Oh no, time stop, and then I'm gonna name this event time start. Okay, so then I'll just call this time stop event. It's gonna be equal to time stop. Okay, and I'll do the same thing here. So time stop event. And then I'll make a local time start event, okay? I'll make it equal to also game, replicated storage, wait for child, time start, okay? And then I'll just copy this over here. So we're gonna fire time stop event first, okay? Time stop event. And then after the timer is done, then, only then, do we fire time start event, okay? Fire server, like so. Time start event. Dot yeah, on server events, connect, function, player, there we go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna literally copy this loop, like so. So we're gonna copy this, and then instead of anchored being true, we set anchored to false. Okay, so we're gonna unanchor all of the players. Yeah, I'll just say unfreezes other players. So how this is gonna work is we're gonna start playing, okay? Yep, time frozen, and after 6 seconds, there we go. Oh, there we go. Look at how amazing this looks. There we go, amazing. Okay. The last thing is, like I said, how do we make everything gray? Okay, let me show you how to make everything gray. All right, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to show you how to use a thing called color correction effect, okay? So if you add an item called color correction effect to lightning, right? Or not lightning, lighting, my bad. It has a thing called saturation, which if you set it to 0, just sets it like this, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate the saturation to go from 0 to -1, okay? So I'm not going to set it equal to -1. I'm going to make it slowly animate to be -1, okay? So how do we do that? So I made a color correction, okay? And then inside of this inside of the script. And then what I'll do, okay, and there's like easier ways of doing this, okay, but I'll make an event like so, called another remote event. And I'll just call this a saturation event. I should probably make another variable, local sat event for saturation event, game or replicated storage, wait for child, saturation event, and I'll copy this over to our other script as well, okay? And what I'll do is I'll say at the very beginning, sat event, fire all clients. So we're gonna fire to every single person, okay? And then we can pass it a value, okay? So I'll pass it the value of true. And basically the reason I'm doing this is so we know, because here we're stopping the time, right? So here we're going to fire a message to every client to have them like set everything to be gray, okay? Which is why I put true, okay? And then I'm gonna copy this, and then we're gonna say, we're gonna, in time start, I'm gonna do the same thing, but set this to false. Meaning that we want the saturation to go back to how it was, okay? So we're gonna fire to all clients, and then in the local script, we'll just say sat event dot on client event connect function, and then because we're passing it a value of true or false, we will say is stopped, okay? So I'm gonna call it is stopped. So if is stopped is true, then we want to remove saturation. If is stopped is false, then we want to bring back saturation. This is where we use something called tween service if we want to animate. Okay, now this video is already getting a little too lengthy, right? But in short, tween service allows us to make animations, right? So what I can do is I can say local ts is equal to game get service tween service. I have like a good amount of videos on tween service, so you could go check those out as well. After you finish watching this one, obviously, I need my viewer attention. What we can do is we can say ts create, okay? Actually, no, wait. If is stopped, then, so if is stopped is true, then ts create, like so. Or I'll make a variable, so local tween is equal to ts create. And what it's going to require is it's going to require the item that we're actually going to be tweening, which is our color correction. So I'll say game.lighting wait for child color correction. Then it's going to ask for actually it's gonna get too lengthy, okay? So what I'll do is I'll make it into a variable, okay? So I'll say local correction is equal to game.lighting wait for child color correction. You don't need to make it a variable, but it's just going to be too long. Like one line is going to be too long if I try to stuff everything in, okay? Then it's going to need a tween info, which I can make a variable for as well. So local tween info, which tween info is equal to tween info.new. And again, you can play around with this, but this basically just asks for the time. So how long will the animation play out for? I'll just say 1 second. And you can do all the other things, but you don't need them. Yeah, so I'm just gonna say tween.new1, okay? And then it's gonna want a property table, which I'm not gonna make a variable for that, okay? So I'll say, okay, tween, we're changing the correction, then here's your tween info. And then for the property table, I'll make a table, and it's basically, we have to give it the name of a property and make that property equal to the new value that you want it to be. So we want to change the correction, we want to change the saturation of the color correction. So what we do is we say saturation is equal to -1. That's all we do. And then we say tween play, like so, right? And then what we could do is we could say else. So if is stopped is false. So else if is stopped is equal to, so if is stopped is equal to false, or no, if it is equal to true, else if it's equal to false, then we can just do the exact same thing. Like we can literally do the exact same thing, but instead of -1, we set it to 0, right? Because 0 is what it is by default. And I believe we are basically done. There we go. How cool is that? Yep. Amazing. And obviously then you can, make this a bit better by like adding some cool sound effect whenever the player stops time. I wish I would do that, but my audio drivers are broken, bro. So like it cannot record my like device audio, which sucks. I would have definitely added some like cool JoJo like stuff though. Like don't worry. But don't worry, like I would have definitely added some like cool like JoJo time stop effect, like a Zawardo or something. And I guess as a final thing, as a very final thing, okay, what I will do is I'll actually make it so that the player himself cannot be frozen by time, okay? So I will say, I'll add one more line over here. So when we're freezing all the players, I'll just say if v is equal to the player, then continue end. And so this one little change, all it's going to do is it's just going to, yeah, so the player isn't unaffected by the change, but all the other players will. All right, there we go. That's pretty cool. So again, you can take this script and you can, use it to your heart's content. Obviously, like modify it to fit your game or, to fit your preferred version of time stop. And if you found this, incredibly helpful, like if literally the best tutorial you've ever watched, because, obviously I'm just that good of a teacher, check out my link tree in the description and the comment section, because I do have 2 courses which you might find useful. Check out my Discord server where we engage in very smart and intellectual conversations every single day. And yeah, so as always, we are back to basics. Thank you for watching.